Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner from the Robust Opposition, and I am here with Margaret Kimberley from the Black Agenda Report. And the title of my show is Why Are Black Racial Justice Activists Standing for Kamala Harris? And maybe Margaret Kimberley will help me figure this out. How you doing, Margaret?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, great. Well, I loved talking to you last time, and I have to say, I was getting very frustrated because let me just give a preview to the audience of how this all came about. I don't live in San Francisco, but I've been living in California for 30 years, and I wasn't really following Kamala Harris's career as a DA or even as so much as an attorney general. But I guess I started following her because I was part of the Occupy movement in 2011. And Carlos Marroquin, a fellow occupier, started Occupy Fights Foreclosures. And he was trying to get justice for people who were fraudulently foreclosed upon. And he tried to have these people meet with Kamala Harris, and she refused to meet with them, even when he bussed them up to Sacramento. And it got to the point where he was forced to protest her outside of her appearance at a California Democratic Party convention down in Los Angeles or Long Beach or somewhere. And she walked right by the protesters. And this was during the time when she was publicly making great hay about how she had done so much. She had joined with Eric Schneiderman in this attorney general action rejecting the foreclosure settlement. She wanted more, but when it came down to it, she really did nothing. It was amounted to maybe $2,000 for a couple hundred people that didn't provide justice at all for the people who were fraudulently foreclosed upon. And of course, The Intercept did the great reporting about how she didn't prosecute Steve Mnuchin because he was head of One West Bank, and they were particularly egregious in terms of those fraudulent foreclosures. Her office recommended that she prosecute him, but he had donated to her Attorney General campaign. She didn't prosecute him. Then after that, he donated to her Senate campaign. And, she's just and now of course he is our Secretary of the Treasury. She is just extremely ambitious. And I think everything she's done has been not motivated by ideology, but motivated by furthering her own career. I know a candidate for Senate who was challenging Dianne Feinstein, who has friends in the California Attorney General's office, and he said they told him she was never there because as soon as she got elected, she started campaigning for Senate. And I think we now know that as soon as she, did not do well in the presidential campaign, she started campaigning for vice president. So internally, and this is what, led me to start researching her. And 18 months ago, I was contacted by somebody called the self-appointed political commentator on Twitter, who has since been kicked off Twitter by the K-Hive. And he or she wrote an exhaustive compendium on Kamala Harris's record as a prosecutor. I mean, yeah. And, people that she had exculpatory evidence, she wouldn't, wrongfully convicted, she wouldn't allow exculpatory evidence. People who had incompetent lawyers, she wouldn't give them a retrial. People who were released after being 30 years in prison, she fought them getting compensation. I mean, all sorts of egregious things, which I'm going to read at the end of the show because I don't want to bore people with this list, but it is way, way more than what you've heard about. It's more than just her prosecuting parents of truants. It's more than her just laughing and mocking people protesting, saying, we want more schools, not jails, more schools, not jails. I mean, it's so much more than that. And lying about her record, that I ended up doing a protest of her at a fundraiser that she had at the president of Universal Pictures in Beverly Hills in February of 2019. And we made a fact sheet on this record, which we handed out to attendees. And they were taking this fact sheet. They thought we were part of the welcoming committee. And obviously somebody read it And then they started ushering people directly from their Teslas into the event. So then we pulled out the megaphone and started reading her record on the megaphone. But I got to tell you something. After that protest, I realized that it shouldn't be me, a white woman, organizing these things. So I tried to get activists from Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, people who I knew, by saying, look, I find out the hosts of these things. I can find out the address. You guys should be doing this. And nobody ever got back to me. And then when I found out that she was, on the short list, I sent this great compendium to both Melina Abdullah from Black Lives Matter LA and Patrisse Cullors, the co-founder of the whole Black Lives Matter movement, and crickets did not get back to me. So then all of a sudden, 2 days ago, I read this article in the Washington Post, which explains why. And I wanted to talk to you about these articles and what you made of them, because you're a great person. You're the first one who taught me the phrase, the Black misleader. So I knew that you would be the one to bring in, because when I started talking about it, I got this kind of reaction from my friends. These are progressive Bernie people. I'm sorry you don't believe it's possible for people to evolve. I find it insulting that you say these folks are easily duped just because their decisions are different from yours. Because I posted this article about Alicia Garza and even Angela Davis praising Kamala Harris. And I just said, so easily, I think I said, otherwise smart women so easily duped. And I think maybe it was my phraseology, which I rephrased. I edited the post.
Well, let me just interrupt you. They're not dupes. They do this quite intentionally. Alicia Garza is one of the queens of patronage of the Democratic Party. She's not going to oppose any vice presidential candidate. Angela Davis, her days as a Marxist are long past. I hope she doesn't still call herself a Marxist. This is like the third or fourth election where she has announced she's going to support the Democrats. And very bizarre reasoning too. I guess she's trying to explain it away. When Obama first ran, she claimed that he was within the Black radical tradition, which is nonsense. You don't get to be a US Senator and a presidential candidate who raises millions of dollars by being in the Black radical tradition. And you mentioned the phrase, the Black misleadership class. That's when we coined it, Black Agenda Report. All of these people, the people I've just mentioned and others, are part of that group. They are people tied at the hip with the Democratic Party, with their funders, with the nonprofit industrial complex, and they will never publicly oppose Democratic candidates for office, especially for the presidency or the vice presidency. The people who founded Black Lives Matter, they are well known for their ties to the Democratic Party. So I'm not surprised at all, but I would just say this to the rest of us. Nobody should change their politics because a certain person is chosen to run for an office. Nobody should change their politics because a Black person is running or because a woman is running, and you have to support them. I mean, that's how they get us to, they get buy-in for things that are just dreadful. And as far as Kamala Harris's record is concerned, she's a typical prosecutor. That is what all of them do. And we must condemn in the harshest terms the way this our injustice system works, and prosecutors are at the root. They're cozy with the cops. The cops feed the people into the system and they prosecute them. They overcharge people who are afraid to try to plead their innocence. American jails are full of innocent people who have pled guilty because they've made this calculus, and they're usually quite a sensible thing to do, as horrible as it is, to plead guilty rather than take a chance on a long sentence. They never help people prove their innocence, quite the opposite. So what she has done is typical for prosecutors across the country. And as far as her ideology is concerned, I don't know that she has one. But that doesn't make her different than many other people who go into politics. The days when people had an ideology, I think, are long past. I think people who go into politics now, they're just, as you said, they're just ambitious. And let's not forget, I love this story that Donald Trump made contributions to her Senate campaigns. His son and daughter-in-law, but they, Ivanka and her, what's the man's name? Kushner, they contributed to Cory Booker's Senate campaign. I think they actually had a fundraiser for Cory Booker, more than just writing a check. And Trump himself contributed to her campaign. And that tells you everything you need to know about why she was chosen. What were the headlines after the announcement was made?
Wall Street heaves a sigh of relief at the choice of Kamala Harris. Yep.
Wall Street's happy. Silicon Valley's happy. So just in case anybody was under some misapprehension that what we, the people, want was a factor in her being chosen, we know it was the 1%, the Democratic Party donor class. They are the ones who wanted her, and that is why she was chosen. And they're looking at her as a potential president. Biden is ill. They're lying about his health. I mean, I was going to say something like there's no transparency about his health. We know that there's something wrong with him, a cognitive issue, a stroke. We don't know exactly what. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't, should he win, and I am not convinced he will. I think it's 50-50, but should he win, I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't serve his first term. So they are looking at her as a president, not just as a vice president. And that explains other things. It used to be there was balance in a ticket. A Northerner picked a Southerner, or somebody thought of as less liberal picked somebody more liberal. That's how Biden was chosen. He was always in the conservative wing of the Democratic Party, and Obama was thought of as a liberal, even though he wasn't. So, or they get a state that is otherwise difficult to win. California is a blue state. She doesn't help them there. A lot of Black people don't like her. I see people falling in line with the propaganda and the gaslighting.
Yeah.
But she is not popular. People are very upset with her record as a prosecutor. So, but the right people wanted her. And so she's Biden's running mate.
Now, let me read some quotes from these people, and maybe we can unpack them. You may have already addressed some of them, but let me just read right here. This is Alicia Garza. Senator Harris has reflected that she had the opportunity to make certain choices that she made back in the 90s when she was the district attorney. If she had the opportunity to make those choices in the Black Lives Matter era, more than 20 years later, that may have shifted. Garza said she met with Harris recently for over an hour and discussed, quote, some of the challenges of this moment, some of the policy that we needed to see her champion in this moment. And it was an important and good meeting. It helps, she added, that Harris suggested she might not embrace the same policies to take today. So now what I want to ask you is, it seems like, that's why I used the word easily duped, maybe easily charmed is a better word, because, Kamala Harris has a very ingratiating personality and people like to be met with. They like to be, to have their voices heard by people in power. And so I guess you're going to figure, like there were a lot of union people that when I was protesting the TPP during Obama and Clinton, nobody wanted to join the protest because they all assumed that Clinton was going to be the next president. And these union leaders did not want to alienate the next president of the United States, even the unions whose main priority that year was defeating the TPP. So this puts me in mind of Black Lives Matter, whose main priority is to try to bring to, end the harassing, the assaulting, and the killing of Black people just for the color of their skin. Mm-hmm. And, they have these protests about individual Black people who were killed, individual prosecutors, like in Los Angeles, they're all bent out of shape about Jackie Lacey, who will not prosecute. And individual courts who are not going to convict. Meanwhile, you have the opportunity for the top cop who has a whole litany of this kind of stuff, who fought against decriminalizing marijuana, who did not support ending the death penalty, who, who did not support body cams, who did not support Prop 47, expunging those nonviolent drug offenses for your record. I mean, this is everything that Black Lives Matter fights against, and yet they have a meeting. And then one other, just let me give you Patrisse Cullors' quote here. She took to Instagram on Thursday to encourage her followers to vote for Biden and Harris. She's been an amazing progressive in the Senate. She has stood up to Trump time and time again. We need a Black woman like her to be in office. And filmmaker Ava DuVernay, who did the 13th about this whole amendment that caused these problems back in the day, yes. She writes, "We either make this happen or literally more of us perish." She wrote, blaming Trump's hot mess of an administration for the disproportionate number of Black and brown people who have fallen victim to the spiraling COVID-19 pandemic. All of a sudden, this is new. Black people not having health care, this is new to Trump all of a sudden. Right. Mm-hmm. People are dying. Someone I love died. The virus is real. If it hasn't visited your doorstep, it will. Oh, but Kamala did this, or she didn't do that. I hear you, I know, and I don't care. Now, when I heard that, it was kind of like when somebody wrote an editorial, a Me Too person wrote an editorial and said, "I believe Tara Reid and I don't care." That was chilling to me. This is chilling to me. This is like Trump derangement syndrome. So I don't think it's just the Democratic Party. I think there's also this Trump derangement syndrome to discuss.
Right. There's Trump derangement and there is Democratic Party. I'm just going to call it corruption. You know, Alicia Garza, just to talk about her briefly, she was behind this crazy scheme, and it was so funny. She fell flat on her face when she was backing Elizabeth Warren. And she engineered this phony endorsement from the Working Families Party, except the Working Families Party rank and file were all Bernie Sanders supporters, just as they were 4 years ago. And it was obvious that this was a phony endorsement. It was the leadership at the top who endorsed Elizabeth Warren. They refused to reveal how this endorsement came about and how it differed from the wishes of the membership. So that's Alicia Garza. So these people are political operators. I don't think they're duped. They try to dupe the rest of us into following along with Democratic Party corruption. And as for Ava DuVernay, I've been trying to tell people, who cares what she says? Her opinions don't count more than yours because she's rich and famous. But that is, unfortunately, that's still a powerful, that makes her a person of some influence in the Black community. The fact that she's so successful, she's a movie director and all those good things, you know, that's fine. But, and we're all ultimately, and I see this with people who call themselves leftists, who call themselves progressive. We have to get rid of Trump. So there's a lot of Trump derangement, and he gives so much material. He's always saying, and people have not learned to ignore a lot of what he says. I mean, he is the president. You can't ignore everything he says. So for example, a couple of days ago, he was telling a crowd, we're going to win again 4 more years. And then he said, but the Russiagate hoax cost me the first term, so I should get a do-over and get an extra term. And and people lost it. He's a fascist. He's going to run a third time. He can't run a third time. It isn't going to happen. But it's the sort of thing that makes people crazy and lose their common sense and think that they have to vote for Biden. And I say this, and I'm not a Democrat anymore, I'm a Green, but I'm trying to tell people, listen, if you really want these things you claim to want, don't just endorse Biden. Tell him, I don't know, I'm still making up my mind. I want Medicare for all, whatever it is that's important to you. You're still supposed to be negotiating with these people. But unfortunately, Democrats in particular see politicians as like their friends or their relatives or something. We are supposed to have an adversarial relationship with them. You do not get what you want by caving into them. You get the opposite of what you want. They're going further and further to the right all the time. I've said at Black Agenda Report, we've said we have a far right party and a center right party. I don't even know if the Democrats are center right anymore. You mentioned marijuana convictions. They've said they don't want marijuana to be legal. That is a vote getter. I mean, even if you were cynical, if you're just cynical, you would be in favor of it. So we see this dumb convention of yesterday was the first night. So many Republicans, John Kasich and Christine Whitman, and which, by the way, does not impress Trump supporters. These people are function outside of the Republican Party establishment. Nobody thought Trump would get the nomination, including him. And having gotten the nomination, they still didn't think he'd win the presidency. But he has this deep reservoir of support, and people don't care about John Kasich. And if the Democrats want to win Ohio, which I think is why they gave him this prominent role, then tell people in Ohio that you're going to do something to help their lives. Yeah. But all the things that help people's lives are things that are opposed by their donor class. Right. Medicare for all makes big pharma. Then you have to regulate prices, or there's no reason for private health insurance, raising the minimum wage. These people have gotten away with this, this horrendously low minimum wage for decades. They don't want it to go up. So all the things that would help people are things that their donors don't want.
Well, let me make 2 points about that, because sure. I agree with you, and ask you to reflect on this. Okay, so this relates to the Trump derangement syndrome. I personally think that, when people come at me with that, but Trump, I would vote for a cardboard box over Trump, I say what you need to understand, or they tell me, this is what I'm getting all over the place, that a vote for the Green Party, which I'm voting Green, is a vote for Donald Trump. And I say, no, a vote for the Green Party is a vote for the Green Party. I am not voting for, well, why aren't you talking about how bad Trump is? And I said, because everybody who's on this Facebook page agrees that Trump is bad. I don't need to talk about how bad Trump is. What I need to say to you is that the whole reason we have Trump is we had 8 years of Obama and 8 years of Clinton, which did not materially change the lives of the 99%. Right. And quite frankly, I don't think that Trump is ideological. They call him a fascist. They call him authoritarian. I don't think he's ideological at all. He used to contribute to Democrats, as you used to say. He used to be pro-choice. He used to talk about single-payer health care. He got rid of the TPP. I mean, he's not he was not talking about non-intervention. And as a matter of fact, ironically, whenever he tweeted that we were going to he was going to pull people out of Syria or Afghanistan, Rachel Maddow would bring the generals on and talk about
how about that?
What a bad idea that is, and he must be Putin's puppet, even though he's like fighting Putin. So my point is, I think, and this is what I try to tell people, that if we have 8 more years of Obama, which is what a Biden-Harris administration would be, and the material conditions of people don't change, in 8 years, we're going to have a smarter, more ideological fascist. And I'm hanging my hat on that belief, and I don't know if you agree with that, if that resonates with you at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility. I answer the question this way. Part of the worst part of this propaganda is that the Democratic Party apparently has no responsibility for getting their candidates elected. So people have been vote shamed, browbeaten. It's the fault of the Greens. It's Bernie Sanders' fault because he ran at all in 2016. Yeah. What is their responsibility? This is one of many ways in which the Democratic Party doesn't act like a political party that's supposed to deliver what its people want it to deliver. They're more like a a fundraising and marketing gimmick. It's their job to get the candidate elected. Hillary Clinton raised $1 billion and then could not get 78,000 more votes in the right place. And what Democrats should be saying to them is, what are you going to do differently this time? But that's why they pushed Russiagate, to make it all, nothing's their responsibility. It's some evil man in another part of the world. That's another story, the Russiagate fraud. I'm quite confident in saying that. But people don't even, and I would say it could be a principled position to say, I want a Democrat to nominate federal judges. Okay, but that does not mean you have to be a chump. In fact, you increase the likelihood of getting the person you want and getting some of the policies you want if you make demands. If you say, I'm not sure I'm voting for you, or what are you going to do differently? Okay, you had John Kasich speak at the convention. What's your big plan to win back Ohio? What is your plan to change things in Wisconsin? What are you doing about the voter ID law there that took thousands of Black votes away from Hillary Clinton? Voter suppression is a big reason that Hillary Clinton lost. So if people want to be anxious about getting rid of Trump, for God's sake, speak up for yourself. You have a better chance of getting rid of him. So make demands of them. Not don't vote for this one, or you have to do this. Ask them, what are you doing? What are you doing differently this time? How'd you screw up the last time? And how is 2020 going to be different? That is an obligation of anyone who wants to get rid of Trump. Being a doormat means defeat. We've already seen they're trying to resurrect Russiagate. Some Senate committee says now they're sure again, the walls are closing in again, that Paul Manafort, this guy who's a consultant lobbyist, crooked man, I'm not going to say anything good about him, but he wasn't doing any business with Russia, but they're resurrecting that. This is their substitute for giving people what they want.
Right.
And the people can say no. The fact that they work so hard on voter suppression and all this propaganda means we have some power, but you have to use it. So that is my response to people who say those things.
Well, let me talk about the other thing that they say, which is, yes, we just have to hold our nose. Biden wasn't our first choice. He wasn't our second or even our third choice. And I don't like Kamala, but we lost your video there.
I'm still here. I was just had to drink, so I didn't want people to see me guzzling. I'm ready.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So they're saying, well, we're just going to hold them accountable. We're going to hold their feet to the fire. To which I say, how well did that work with Obama? How well did that work with Clinton? They were able to do things that Republicans only dreamed of because there was no Democratic opposition. And what happens is the liberals, and I distinguish the liberals from the progressives, they go back to brunch. It's like when I was at the Women's March, the day,
yes, they put it on their signs. They actually said it.
If Hillary were president, I'd be at brunch right now. And that's exactly the point. So they were out there, Indivisible was organizing all this stuff to resist Trump and resist his agenda. I was on a call with Indivisible about healthcare and saving the ACA. And not once in this hour-long call did they talk about what we really need, which is single-payer healthcare. It was all about saving the ACA. And Planned Parenthood was on that call. Talk about another misleader. This is a group that has always opposed single-payer healthcare because somehow they think it's going to they're going to be out of a job. And they actually sent a letter. Their political director in California sent a letter to our Speaker of the Assembly, Anthony Rendon, when he held our bill in the Rules Committee, congratulating him on that so that it couldn't advance. And they also sue unions. In one of their chapters, the workers were trying to unionize. They went to court about that. And they were paying their CEO, Cecile Richards, $750,000. So that's a lot of money for a nonprofit organization, in my opinion. But that being said, these people are talking about holding them to their feet to the fire. And what I see is that when a Democrat's in office, we progressives get so split, whether we're fighting fracking, or we're fighting for single-payer health care, or we're fighting for immigrants, or we're fighting for racial, whatever we're fighting, it's like we're fragmented, and we can't do it. We can't do it. And the only people who they're accountable to are, like you said, their donors.
Right.
So,
well, it's funny you should mention this phrase, holding feet to the fire. It's the title of my Black Agenda Report column, which is coming out tomorrow, Wednesday, is Feet to the Fire and Other Lies. They're not going to do it. They don't mean it. They may even think they mean it. If Trump loses, they will breathe a sigh of relief and they will let Biden and Harris do whatever they want. The other problem is people are so divorced from real activism. For most people, their political activism consists of voting. They don't even know how to oppose anyone. This propaganda machine we've seen it before. As soon as if Biden takes office, there'll be excuses. Well, he doesn't have enough of a majority. Well, Rush Limbaugh said this or that. Well, aren't you glad that, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg finally kicks the bucket, there'll be a Democrat. Then it will be an off-year election. Well, we've got to win the House back. It'll constantly be a reason to tell people to shut up. And so they will. So I don't want to hear any of this feet to the fire. I actually have, frankly, more respect for people who just say, I want Trump gone. I want a Democratic president. I don't really care what they do. I actually have more respect for people like that than I do for people who claim they're going to be active in ways in which they are really not interested in, or even if they're interested in, they don't know how to do it. They get Democrats in office, as you said, NAFTA, Bush the first couldn't get that through. They needed Clinton to do that. Media consolidation, they got Clinton to do that. Making the tax cuts for the rich, the temporary tax cut, making them permanent, Obama did that. Bailing out the banks. Kamala, and talk about the banks, Biden's state of Delaware is the banking state where they do everything that the banks want them to do. Why do you think Wall Street wants her? They know she's not going to do anything. So the people who think they're going to hold feet to the fire don't know how to do it, have not acknowledged the corruption in the party that puts these people in office in the first place. So people need to stop. I don't want to hear any more about holding feet to the fire. It's just ridiculous. We have a system that is imploding. We have seen it with COVID-19, the unemployment, the high death rate. We live in a failed state and we must get rid of the whole thing. We've got to tear it all up. The protest movement around George Floyd's murder has to be a broader movement about many injustices in this society and the way the US behaves abroad. That is our only hope. There's no hope with these figureheads that get into office.
I had Helen Caldicott on my show the other day, and she is a foremost anti-nuclear activist. She inspired me as a college student back in the late 70s. And we were just bemoaning the fact that there really isn't that much of a peace movement right now. And some people attributed it to the fact that there's no draft. But it's also because, this American exceptionalism, and Danny Haiphong, as you know, who wrote the great book, American Exceptionalism, American Innocence, was on my show talking about that book, has been so sort of inculcated into Americans, this nationalism, this exceptionalism, that it just doesn't really resonate with them why we need peace. And we're 100 seconds away from midnight. It used to be when I started in the late 70s, we were 8 minutes away from midnight. Now the doomsday clock is 100 seconds. So let me talk to you about another reason why I think some of these Black women, and I'm just speaking progressives, friends of mine who aren't necessarily leaders or trying to come up in the Democratic Party, but just kind of the pushback that I'm getting. And it was hinted at by this article by Erica Smith, who's an LA Times columnist, and the title of her column was, "I wasn't a fan of Kamala Harris. It took President Trump to change my mind." And she was responding to his attacks, calling her a radical, which is so laughable. Yeah. And other people's reactions, calling her, questioning her Blackness, which we've seen even in the Black community. She says, "What's changed for me, and I suspect for a lot of Black people who were initially less enthusiastic about Harris as VP, has been the constant stream of racist attacks against her from Trump and his various minion mouthpieces. Lukewarm about her before, now we're fired up and defensive." And then she tells this story about how when she was a little girl, a white girl said, "You're not Black," because she's light-skinned, and she was asked to prove it. So it's like all this stuff that they associate with identity and representation. And my personal friend said this to me. She wrote, "My husband told me that Kamala has this goofy homegirl persona and that she laughs and giggles a lot."
She does.
He said, "Kamala reminds me of him." That was a huge compliment to me. I even donated to Biden, which I would never have done otherwise, just to show support. Was she my first choice? No, I thought Karen Bass was the more progressive pick. But I am proud of Kamala and resent anyone who thinks I'm stupid because of it. So this is kind of a thing where, she laughs and giggles about, locking up parents of truants, and about mocking people who protest we need more schools, less jails, right? This is what she laughs about. Very, very goofy, right? So what I'm wondering, she says, "I've been probably invited to 10 Biden Facebook support groups. I'm seeking out ones for Kamala. Lauren is the textbook problematic white liberal who refuses to take counsel about her offensive comments that are all too often rooted in white supremacy." And that's what I get. So this is like, I'm a white person, I can't say anything. And that's one of the reasons I brought you on, Margaret, because I want you to back me up on this. This is, I feel, look, and this happened with Obama. I remember talking with Marcus Farrell, who was Bernie Sanders' Black Lives Matter outreach person. And this is after, the election, and Obama's going out and making $400,000 speeches to banks. And his thing is, why are people objecting to this? Can't a brother make some money? And so there's that whole mentality of like, it's completely separate from their policies. And these are otherwise progressive people that are giving them a pass because they're Black or because they relate to some experience in their past.
Well, I don't envy you, frankly, trying to make your case, but I would urge you and others to continue to do so. If you're being consistent, you go right ahead and say those things. The representation is still very important to Black people. It is a legacy of the days of Jim Crow, when a Black face in a high place was to be celebrated. Period. End of story. Not to be questioned, to be celebrated. The same thing happened when Obama ran. Before he won the Iowa caucuses and proved that white people would vote for him, people were asking questions. Who is this guy? What does he say? Who's behind him? Then when people knew he could really be president, all questions were asked. People would even say that. I'm not asking questions anymore. I know he can be president. It's very sad to see. We all have to fight against it. I'm seeing it already among family and friends and the general public. People saying, well, and it's Trump. It's because, and they're always racist. I used to joke that Obama paid right-wingers to be racist because it helped him out so much, and I was joking. But we're seeing that again, where people are so devoid of any political orientation that they cannot even defend themselves. That's the saddest thing to me. So when you're talking about a politician, you're talking about someone who's supposed to deliver for you. They're supposed to do what you want them to do. Maybe not all the time, but my God, people don't even force them to go through the motions. That's why they tell these stories. That's why, what was it she said, Biden, that little girl was me. And she laughed when Stephen Colbert was interviewing her and he asked her, you really came at Biden in that debate. And she just giggled, ha, 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 ha. It was just a debate. She couldn't even, it's not the first time. Remember, Reagan chose George H.W. Bush. Bush talked about his voodoo economics and so forth, and then he chose him. He felt like it was to his benefit. So it's not the first time. I was pretty shocked that she wasn't prepared for the question and didn't know how to defend herself. But she does. That little girlish laugh, she's got to lose. She needs to lose it, frankly. But I would just, I can't tell you what to do about these people. I faced them too. We faced them at Black Agenda Report. When Obama was president, we were called haters. We were said to be in league with racist white right-wingers. Well, they are white-wingers, aren't they? We were exhorted to put everything aside and just defend him. But we didn't do it. And that it can be a lonely road, frankly, to be principled at this time, even to be principled about self-interest. People aren't even self-interested anymore. And so many liberals, they just connect with being liberal and feeling superior. They don't even know how to operate politically and make demands. So, and foreign policy, it is a shame that it's not discussed. We have to connect the two. Foreign policy is not some frill. We're not going to have a country where 60% of the budget is taken up by defense spending and then be surprised when we can't have nice things.
Right, they make that point when they talk about in Los Angeles, constantly, every day, they're talking about the people's budget. Melina was on a Bernie Delegates Network. They did a shadow convention all weekend, 7 hours of panels. And one of the panels was on the people's budget and how 54% of the discretionary budget is spent on the police. And this money needs to go elsewhere. And these functions that the police are doing need to be done by other people who are not carrying guns. And yet they don't make the same connection that the military is the police of the world. And what we do to Black and brown people in this country, we're doing to Black and brown people in the rest of the world. And Martin Luther King made that connection right before he was shot.
That's why he was shot. Yeah, but sure.
Let me ask you a couple of more points because we're running towards the end of our time. And I just want to reflect on a couple of other things relating to this. So, Melina, speaking of Melina Abdullah, she mentioned people want us to go on and either talk negatively about Kamala Harris or talk positively about Kamala Harris. I want to be very clear. Black Lives Matter believes that our primary work is the work of organizing and being in streets. There's a fallacy that says that you move from protest to politics. You do not move from protest to politics. The only thing that ever creates change is protest and politics.
True, so, but it's the protest that comes first. Everyone, it's a funny thing. Everybody fetishizes the civil rights era, the liberation movement, without talking about what it is that people did. Millions of people acted in opposition to politicians. They moved in opposition to Lyndon Johnson. And in so doing, they created a political crisis and they forced the system to reckon with them. That is what happened. So if you're going to talk about this golden era, then you should talk about what it is that people did. They opposed politicians. They, one of the things that annoyed me so much about Ava DuVernay's dopey missive was she said, we're being disrespectful to, questioning anything about Kamala Harris. We're being disrespectful to our elders. Well, our elders did what I just said. They fought for the right to say what they wanted, to do what they wanted, to break through these barriers which said, this is your place, you can't go outside of it. That's what our elders did. And that is what people need to remember if they're going to talk about the power of that time and hearken back to it all the time. But this representationalism is deadly. It is just deadly. It ensures, I was going to say that we get nothing. It ensures that things go further and further to the right. And things in this country are at a very serious point. We have 160,000 people dead from COVID, millions of people unemployed. Congress leaves town and doesn't give them their money. People, the states and the cities are desperate for cash, and none of that has happened. So I want people to be ready for this collapse that we are watching in slow motion, maybe not so slow anymore, and realizing that Joe Biden is not going to slow that down, not at all. And Kamala Harris won't either. That's why she's chosen. That's why he was chosen. That's why they schemed and rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders. Even his little bit of reformism was off the table, was something that was not to be discussed. So it's on us, and people need to grow up. And sometimes I'm sorry, I just can't, I can't indulge people. People need to grow up, and we have to be aware of who acts in our interests and who does not. And many of these influential people, famous people who have high positions are not working in our interests. And the fact that they have a blue check by their name, or they're the head of this and that, oftentimes is a reason to ignore them. So I don't care what some celebrity says. I don't care what the, movement for Black Lives / Democratic Party bag lady says. I don't care what they say. I care about us. I care about human beings in this country and the rest of the world. And I can't care about those people if I listen to people who are so compromised.
Now, let me ask you about representation, because I think that goes hand in hand with identity politics, which I've long said is dividing the left, because then we get into this oppression Olympics situation where the African Americans say, until we deal with the original sin of slavery, I can't talk to you. And the Native Americans say, until we deal with the original sin of the genocide of the Native Americans, I can't talk to you. And then the feminists will say, until we deal with the original sin of patriarchy, I can't talk to you. And we're divided. And it reminds me of this quote, and I just looked it up because apparently it was said in an interview with Robert Kuttner, who is the co-founder and editor of the American Prospect, and he was on my show talking about Elizabeth Warren, who he liked. He said, when Steve Bannon impulsively phoned me 3 years ago and said some incautious things about his boss, he got fired as White House political director when the Prospect published my interview. The most revealing thing he said was this: the Democrats, the longer they talk about identity politics, I got them. I want them to talk about racism every day. If the left is focused on race and identity and we go with economic nationalism, we can crush the Democrats. And you saw that happen with Trump. He pretended to be an economic populist and he won again. So do you think that he's going to be able to get away with that because in November, everybody's going to be in such dire straits economically and COVID? Do you think he can get away with that? Where the Democrats are still talking about, and even Bernie, he talks about him, he's a racist, he's a xenophobe, he's a homophobe, he's a sexist.
Well, 60 million people didn't care. I don't know, people act like 2016 didn't happen. Bannon's point only works if the Democrats continue to offer people nothing. The Democrats deep sixed Bernie because they knew he would win. They did not want a president, even if they were going to fight him, and they would have, they did not want these things to be discussed. There are people who voted for Trump if they knew they could get Medicare for all and they'd always have free health care, they would have voted for him. He would have peeled off votes. So Bannon's statement works only if the Democrats do nothing. But if the Democrats offer people things that they need, they can get some votes from not just their own people. They can increase their turnout. Those people who are infrequent voters, who aren't motivated to vote, and I see no reason why they're going to be more motivated this year than they were in 2016. that's how you get them out. Obama got people out because there was this excitement about the first Black president. So people who never voted or who hadn't voted in years, they came out to vote again. Well, people would do that if you said there's a pandemic, we're going to have Medicare for all. Biden would win, he'd be a shoo-in, end of discussion. But if the Democrats continue not to do that and think that just pointing at Trump and talking about how awful he is, then Steve Bannon is right. Actually, this time, Trump doesn't even have to offer this economic nationalism because people know he didn't mean it or he can't do it. So he said he was going to bring jobs back to the country, manufacturing jobs. Did he do that? No. He talked about not intervening in other countries. As you pointed out, the Democrats are the ones who stopped that. They attack him from the right on foreign policy. And I'm not defending his foreign policy, the sanctions that kill people, all of the things he's done.
Yeah, killing Soleimani.
Yeah, yes, which was something that brought all the countries that have been declared adversaries, brought them all closer together. Russia and China are trading with the dollar less and less, this cockamamie scheme to get rid of Huawei and tell these little vassal states, otherwise known as our allies, they can't use Huawei either, or getting rid of TikTok. All these things accelerate the country's demise. But the Democrats agree. Chuck Schumer's talking about the Chinese Communist Party having your data and all this nonsense that Trump and Pompeo talk about.
Yeah. Okay. I want to end on one note of hope, and that's a quote that I want to read from Sonali Kolhatkar, who is, she hosts a show on Pacifica Radio. And she says, as an Indian woman, I am expected to rejoice in Harris's political stardom. And while there is a modicum of excitement in seeing a woman whose mother could have been one of my own relatives, it is the sort of limited pride one feels at seeing Indian origin actors Mindy Kaling or Aziz Ansari on screen playing roles that are palatable to white audiences. While I may share Harris's heritage, I identify far more strongly with the politics of the squad and their ilk. And she goes on to talk about the hopeful nature of the fact that we've gotten new members of the squad in these recent elections to join the squad, and Ro Khanna and Pramila Jayapal. And now there's going to be so many more Democrats representing all these different identities and still have a progressive political philosophy that she's kind of hanging her hat on and saying, let's look to this as the future of the Democratic Party. But you not being a Democrat, I don't know that you would go as far as her.
Well,
right?
I'd say the hope is from us. It has to come from us. All of these people who I like to some degree or other, but Jayapal, what did she do? They put together this phony committee to make it look like they were listening to Bernie's proposal. She never raised the issue of Medicare for all. So
she has the bill. She authored the bill. Yeah, she
right,
did.
but I mean, in this committee or this platform or whatever, I'm using the wrong terminology. She didn't push it because that was the whole point of her being there. It's like asking AOC to speak for 60 seconds, but Kasich gets more time and insults her at the same time. So I think the hope has to be with us. I am hopeful about the people who hit the streets in the wake of George Floyd's killing, who are now talking about general strikes and rent strikes and all of the things that we need. That is where I see hope. I see hope with the people.
Very good. And that's a wonderful note to end our show on. I want to thank you very much for coming on. As usual, you provide a great perspective that my audience needs and loves to hear. So I want to also promote my show for tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to be talking about, is this the first week that students are going back to school, some virtually, but many in person. I'm going to be interviewing two people, Sasha Abramsky, who's the lead reporter in a series that Capital in Maine is running on how going back to school affects elementary students, middle schoolers, high schoolers, teachers, parents, and the community at large. And he will be joined by Michael Flanagan, who is a teacher in the Bronx, who is a union representative and also a member of the Badass Teachers Association. So that show will be tomorrow at the same time. We're counter-programming the farce that is the Democratic Party convention with more interesting programming, I would hope. And as usual, I would ask you to share this show. I'm going to upload it to my YouTube channel and then tweet it out. So if you're on Twitter, you can share it there. You can follow me at Lauren_Steiner on Twitter. My YouTube channel is Lauren from LA. And Margaret, where can people find your work?
I'm on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog. I have a Facebook page, Margaret Kimberley, patreon.com/Margaret Kimberley. And you can see my columns in Black Agenda Report every week, blackagendareport.com.
Great. Thank you again for joining me.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, stay safe, wear your mask, and keep fighting.
Peace out.